Let us turn our attention now to the brief summary that we find presented at the close of the logical outline. It reads, following an initial introduction of the principal character, Creator God, a problem emerges, dark chaos, Section 1. Even within that introduction lies the kernel of the solution, spirits hovering, which solution blossoms in Section 2 with 2 recurring cycles. Let me pause before continuing the reading of the summary to indicate that it's endeavoring to talk us through and walk us through the outline without giving us all the subpoints. It's rather giving us the overarching flow. And I trust you notice how this is being expressed in compressed form. Continuing on then. In the first cycle, imposition of order creates fields or regions in which other things subsequently may operate. In the second cycle, God populates these fields or regions, including the appearance of humans as a special creation. With the problem magnificently solved, God proclaims a day of rest or holiday for the next day. This summary allows us then to put in more flowing language to capture the development of thought and connectedness of the main ideas. Notice it's not summarizing every single subpoint, but rather helping the reader to more quickly, in a flowing fashion, grasp the cascading of the main ideas that we feel are operating within our passage. Let's scroll down and now cover the checkpoints. I would ask that after you finish the assignment, then before turning it in, walk through these checkpoints to see whether or not you have carried it out as completely as possible. Number 1, do all the headings and subheadings form complete sentences? Or have we from time to time fallen into our old habit, how we're customarily instructed to outline, which is simply with nouns or phrases? If so, go back and add verbs. Point number 2, have I listed the respective verses at the end of each heading, subheading? Number 3, do I have any single point subheadings? This is, by the way, a principle, a rule of outlining that you may recall. And there's a general rule that if I have, for example, major heading 1 and then subheading 1A, but that subheading 1A is single point subheading, that is, there is no subheading 1B, I am not then permitted to enjoy the luxury of even having reduced subpoint 1A to that level. There have to be at least 2 subpoints in order to justify having even one subpoint of a given level. So if I have no subpoint 1B, I am not permitted to list some content as subpoint 1A. No A without a B. And see, you can see in parentheses the caution, the instruction. If I have constructed a subpoint 1A, but I have nothing in the material that warrants comprising 1B, then I need to skip that level of subheading 1A and somehow fit that content of 1A into the previous and superior, the larger, the more major heading. Checkpoint number 4. Do all verses covered in the subpoints appear in the span of verses listed for the superior heading? Superior heading, say, is heading number 1. As I move down to subheadings 1, A, B, and C, I want to be sure that A, B, and C are accounting for all the verses that I said in the superior heading I was planning to cover. I must not leave anything out. That's the idea. Point 5. Have I taken the liberty to resequence any verses? Have I imposed my own order, thinking to have improved on what the biblical writer did? We must not do that. It appears in its current sequence for a reason. So the task, the responsibility on us is to figure out what is that reason and not to presume to improve on it. Point 6, have I intentionally or inadvertently left out any verses? I am not permitted to do this either. They're all present for a reason. I need to put them back. I need to find a way to change my outline to accommodate the text, not bend the text to fit how I think it ought to read, cleaning it up, as it were. Number 7, by the way, as we submit ourselves to the text as it stands, so often fresh power and insight will emerge that we otherwise would have just run roughshod over and ignored had we resequenced it or omitted verses because we didn't quite understand how they operated. Number 7, have I taken the time to include, and we might say inject, for these are injections, these are interpretive additions of our own. Have we included those expressions or phrases that show how a given point relates to what has preceded? These are our connectives. If not, go back and include them. If you're not sure, notice, make an educated guess. Try to feel how the passage flows. When does the passage, as it were in terms of volume, when is it becoming softer? When is it pausing for an explanation? When does it rise to a crescendo, building on what precedes? And then perhaps when it reaches the end, it explodes with a conclusion. Or maybe it breaks off with no conclusion at all, a cliffhanger, which is in fact the powerful close of the short book of Jonah. It ends with a question of all things. And that in itself is just so foundational to the impact, the intended impact of the book. Step number 8, have I italicized those transitional expressions? Please go back and italicize them. Incidentally, it's not necessary for every single subheading to present a connective. You'll notice in the outline that I've offered you for Genesis 1, several of the subheading points do not begin with transitional or connective phrases, but certainly the major ones do. Use them as often as possible, as often as reasonable, let's put it that way. As often as reasonable, at least at the major headings. Try and force yourself to come up with something that is explaining why the major blocks are standing in the sequence that they are. Number 9, finally, regarding those transitional expressions, those connectives, I need to go back and ask myself how often have I resorted to mere chronological sequencers, such as then, next, so, or after that. Now, if I'm dealing with a story, as opposed to a song or a sermon like a prophetic oracle, yes, it's natural that stories move along a chronological vector. Overall, they are told in a time-sequenced order, aren't they? This can incline us to resort simply to chronological connectives, then and after that, and thereupon, or something like this. But can you detect that this results in a rather boring outline? Very, very dull. Is there nothing more dynamic going on in the development of the plot of the story? You can see that in the case of Genesis 1, it is chronological, and it would have been easy, much easier, to simply say after that, then, next. But this would have only given us information of chronological ordering. There would have been no dynamic awareness of dynamic development of plot, of problem and resolution. Consequently, again, number 9, if you find yourself in a narrative passage and you're using chronological sequencers too much, then go back and see if there is not some other concept level of understanding the passage, which will lead you to concept sort of transitional phrases, connectives, that will then help the story actually burst into life before you. It will leap off the page when you do that. And it's very much worth the discipline. We'll conclude by going back to the beginning of this assignment and observing then that your focal passage is indicated in the bold column. Column 4 is 2 Samuel 22. You'll notice that this assignment, you should be able to complete it in 1 to 2 pages. I would encourage you to single space. But don't let the brevity, the smallness of pages devoted to it in any way belie the fact of how much time it's going to do it. I'm well aware that this is a very time-consuming assignment. It will take a great deal of practice, of crafting, of drafts, as you immerse yourself into the passage and try and pull it into yourself through the discipline of logical outline. It takes a lot of time, but when it's done, the passage will come alive for you, and the outline itself will make very good preparation for a transition into, a conversion into an expository preaching or teaching outline. This won't be the same as a preaching outline. No, you will need to craft it, to modify it some, but the overall lobes of it, the groupings of thought, will make it fairly easy and to convert into a preaching outline, a simplified preaching outline, and the dynamism that you will have tapped into, the voltage of the message that you will have gotten a hold of through this process will be just of incredible value for you as you prepare then to convert it to a declaration, a teaching, or a preaching to share with others for their spiritual nourishment.